Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD of Arrows Group, where I'm interviewing thought leaders, senior directors, and people within both our software engineering, DevOps, and cyber realms. The podcast is aimed at our STEM graduate listeners, where we cover a bit about the story of our guests, stuff that's happening in their world right now, and that all-important career advice for, again, many of our listeners who are looking to enter the job market. So really pleased to have Chris Cooper with me today. Chris is the global cybersecurity and strategy lead for CapGemini. I think anyone listening to the podcast will know CapGem. We were just having a joke about them now. I think something like 250,000 employees or something like this globally. So they really are one of the leading consultancies in the market, and their work is super varied. So it'll be interesting to hear from Chris a bit about the world he lives within such a big organization. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
So let's jump straight in, and yeah, I'd love to know a bit about your background and your story to how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, certainly. So it's a bit of a varied background. Now, when I joined back in '99, it was still quite hard to get into cybersecurity. I know people think it's hard now, but it was even harder back then. So I actually started out in telecoms. So after doing an IT degree, I went to work for Nortel Networks, and I was fortunate enough to get involved in doing the first trials of ADSL around Europe. So I was touring around Europe, setting up POCs with various companies who were looking at rolling that out to their customer base. But from that, I then got the opportunity to start to try things like VPNs and radius servers and things like that to add a layer of security to those pieces. So that was kind of sparked my interest in it. And then from there, I went on to work on the first deployments of GPRS and then 3G. So again, there wasn't much cybersecurity in there to begin with, and I helped develop some of the pieces around that for Nortel. So now we were implementing the data end of it, the cybersecurity pieces, and by today's standards, it's fairly basic, but it was fairly cutting edge at the time. So from there, I really decided I wanted to get more deeply into cybersecurity, and had to kind of make a bit of a career plan as to how I was going to get into a full-time cybersecurity job. So I moved to work for Devon and Cornwall Police as their networks and CJX officer, it was called, which was the Criminal Justice Extranet. But I was basically, from a technical side, responsible for the cybersecurity as well. So that was kind of my first step on that process. And then from there, I went to work for Serco and the Royal Navy, working within a secure site in Devonport Naval Base. And then I made my first real big step, which was going to Flybe, where I became the head of IT security, and then head of information security when we rebranded it a little while into that. So that was kind of my first full-time cybersecurity job. And then from there, I moved on to what eventually became Hewlett Packard Enterprise. It went for a few various name changes along the way. But I got to work on some really good things there, like Army secure systems, and then the big Atlas network, which again was for the Ministry of Defence. And then I went into solutioning. So I was working on what they called mega deals. So it was any deals that were 100 million or more. And I would solution and price the cybersecurity part of it. And then from there, I then went on to work in the security consultancy piece, running the chief security officers team or client security officers team. And then ultimately the security strategy and risk management team. So I had about 150 consultants working for me at that point. And then that was my last company before I joined CapGemini, where I was for the first 3.5, 4 years, I was the head of the cybersecurity practice for Northern Europe. So I ran all the managed security services for our clients, all the security consultancy, the pre-sales and the solutioning. And then more recently, I've just moved into the global hub where I've taken up this role as the global cybersecurity strategy lead.
Fantastic.
So been a bit of a varied course.
Yeah. But that I mean, what a brilliant journey though, because one of the things that again, many of our listeners, but also when I speak to guests is, you get two types of people entering careers. One is people who try a few different things and just fall into a certain industry or technology, and they happen to love it, and then they make a career. Or what it sounds to me, the other side is where you mentioned you did a career plan. So from when you started in telco and then made that conscious decision, actually, I want to get into cyber, and that's a passion or where I want to go. It sounds like you were quite strategic, where you then first got into the police, learned what you needed to do, and worked through. Is that right? Was there sort of a plan of where you wanted to get to?
Yeah, no, broadly speaking, it wasn't as blunt as, no, I want to work for the police, then I want to work for an airline, but it was looking at some of those key things that I felt would give me the opportunity to be a full-time cybersecurity person. So it was kind of saying, well, okay, if I could get some public sector cybersecurity experience of the policies and things, that would be a real good tick in the box. And then if I can get involved in e-commerce, that would be a really good tick in the box. So yeah, it was planned from that perspective to then take me forward. And I've tried to keep doing that as I've gone on now, thinking about, well, where am I trying to get to next, and what kind of pieces do I need for the jigsaw puzzle for doing that? And that applies throughout your career.
Yeah, and what was your average tenure? Because again, in our parents' generation, people would work at one company for 25, 30 years, which is now something so far in the past. Did you have like an average tenure throughout these moves?
It's varied a little bit, because with some of the big companies I've worked at, like HPE and CapGemini, you can obviously move roles more. So you can almost say you've started again several times. But I would say around 2 to 3 years was probably the average. I think if you do less than about 18 months, it can kind of raise questions. But I think once you've done 2 years in our industry, it's just accepted that you might move on to a different role or a different company.
Yeah. And so why cyber? What's the underlying drivers? What excites you when you think about that as the wider concept?
So the original reason was, and it's still a passion today, was around the whole privacy piece and protecting people's data. So that was what really interested me in the beginning. And then I started to recognize the constant evolution of cybersecurity, and that means that constant change. And that's what kind of drives me every day, is that things are constantly different. There's new threats, there's new technologies. The cybersecurity remit's expanding year by year in terms of the areas we cover. We've gone from just basic enterprise IT, and obviously the last few years we took on OT and IoT, and now there's 5G cybersecurity coming along and things. So it's always developing and changing and evolving, and that I think makes it exciting, keeps it varied, but also means there's a long future ahead. Hopefully.
Well, and I couldn't agree with you more around the ever evolving and the long future. I mean, technology as a whole is just wonderful for that, and the fact that it is evolving at a million miles an hour. But it's from my view, looking at it from a supplier point of view, I guess the thing that's really interested me over the years is how, with the evolvement of technology, cyber and data have just become powerhouses, are so essential now to the infrastructure, the fabric of pretty much any company. Anyone who's wanting to do something that has a digital footprint has to have an appreciation for how you protect your data and how you use your data, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the smallest company, it's almost impossible not to have some form of digital footprint now. Even if you're not actively selling online and that type of piece, you still have to have a digital presence, whether it's social media and your connections to the tax office and everything else. So everybody's affected to a certain extent. It's really moved on from when I started, cybersecurity was often seen as a blocker, whereas now we're seen very much as the enabler. And I know it's an overused term. Now some people kind of think it's a bit we shouldn't use that term anymore. But in my mind, that is how we make cybersecurity relevant. Is we have to be part of driving the business forward. We can't be just there saying, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z every time. It's, well, why and what value is it going to bring?
Yeah. And again, as I said, I couldn't agree with you more, because what I've also seen that a lot of large enterprise companies now who used to outsource it all are wanting that blend, aren't they? Where they need the robustness and the IP and the confidence and the security of large companies like CapGemini, but they also want that slight knowledge transfer to understand what's going on rather than just totally offshore it. Is that a trend that you see?
I think there's a balance. You tend to see cycles with outsourcing, and not just in cyber, but in other areas as well, where companies will go through a cycle of outsourcing, and then they'll decide they want to insource it, and then they'll outsource it. And with cyber, as you say, you're also getting this hybrid model where now a large company might say, well, we want to set up our own SOC, or security operations center, but we don't have enough capability and people skill to do that. So we want to have partly CapGemini staff, for example, and partly their own staff. So it varies very much by industry and company. But we're also seeing massive growth every year in full outsourcing of cybersecurity, even with global enterprises, because I think that there's still that very much pressure on a lack of people, and also companies starting to think, well, this isn't my specialism. I want an expert to look after this for me.
Yeah, and I couldn't, again, I think that's a really valid point, that when I've been speaking to large enterprise clients, the challenge is, and we said it earlier, with technology and especially cyber evolving as quickly as it is, if you do not have a total overview of many different companies, clients, the knowledge that you gain from having a client base and then looking at trends to be able to protect all of your customers versus just looking under the bonnet of one business. So I can always see there's a challenge there, and so that IP of using partners, and I guess that leads quite nicely on to thinking about our listeners who, many people want to have that breadth of experience. So working at a company like CapGemini is always at the top of many people's lists because of the varied work, the work they can do. What do you see? Is there a skills gap, or is there specific areas within cyber that needs more graduates, needs people coming in and learning that part of the trade?
So I think there's a constant demand for more people in general. All the surveys you see shows there's a massive shortage of cybersecurity people globally. But I think also as we were saying earlier, that the remit of cybersecurity is steadily expanding. So that's bringing in new skills we need as well. So, for example, with the OT, we need manufacturing type IT skills. But now, as it goes out further, we're also now starting to need data scientists and artificial intelligence specialists and things as we bring in those technologies. So the remit's spreading, which changes the skill mixture that we need. And then you've got the growing demand and the growing size of the threat landscape is driving that requirement even further. So that there's lots of opportunities. And that's one of the great things about cybersecurity is there's so many different areas you can work in. You don't have to be a technical person. You can work in governance and risk. You can work in architecture. You can work in strategy. You can be a CISO, or you can work in a SOC. There's all these different areas, and you can move between them.
And that's really interesting, the fact you can move between them, because that's a really important point, I think, about cyber is there is that opportunity, unlike other sort of industries or even within tech. it'd be very hard to move from being a software engineer, or used to be a software engineer, into maybe a product lead or what have you, because they're perceived as different skill sets. But it sounds like within cyber, because the fundamentals or the core backbone of the skill set is intelligence, strategic, and understanding systems, is from what I see. Would that be a fair point?
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I've always taken the view when I'm hiring graduates in particular, they don't have to have the background of security or even IT or even any technical degree. Now, there's certain things that they need, like logical analysis and those types of skills that I can't teach them. But as long as they've got those, everything else we can teach them. So no, I've had some really excellent cybersecurity graduates who've had economics degrees and chemistry degrees and English, and as long as they've got those core skills, which are kind of you're almost born with, the rest of it we can teach you and help you. And okay, there may be some areas you can't work in so well if you haven't got a technical background. So no, you might struggle to be a security architect, for example, but there's so many other things that you can do, and it certainly doesn't stop you progressing in any way. It's just different routes into the cybersecurity environment and the industry.
And what a brilliant point, because and I think we first started speaking, didn't we, when I think I approached you around something we're quite passionate about. We share the same passion about STEM graduates, and how do we actually get more graduates entering the technology world, where it seems even at STEM, a lot of people study STEM subjects but may not necessarily go into a technical role. They'll either go into, in the old days, people were attracted to banking or pharmaceuticals, and now, there's a common quest of being able to attract people, as you said, economics degrees, English degrees. It's the logical thinking, because we're breaking down barriers that you don't have to have per se a hardcore technical degree if you're looking at the wider cyber landscape, I guess.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and it's one of those areas of work where diversity really matters, because we need all those different perspectives and skills and different things. Now, whether it's from neurodiversity through to any other type of diversity, they all really support the various different things we need to do. And there's really good opportunities for people. But I think we're not necessarily very good at telling the world, and particularly graduates and schools, about all the different options in cybersecurity. I think a lot of people still think it's all about configuring firewalls and things like that, which is part of the area, but it's a tiny part these days.
Yeah, and again, it's just the wonderful world that it's transpiring into become. So, is there one or two projects, or when you think about stuff that comes across your plate from a strategic and well, your global role, what do you think are the big things within the cyber world right now that is moving the industry along?
So there's quite a lot happening. So there's been obviously a big increase in regulation over the last 5 years, from GDPR through to NIST directive and things like that. So that's driving a lot of change in particularly the utilities and all the companies that provide critical national infrastructure, and that's happening across Europe. And obviously GDPR has affected the world, and although it's in place now, it affects everything we do when we're looking at new technologies. But 5G is going to make a massive difference, because 5G suddenly means you can have 1 million devices connected in a square kilometre. That's a massive amount of things. And that means things like IoT and those areas are going to really rocket. And we've seen plenty of examples where IoT devices aren't secure. So that's going to have to catch up with the world. So there's all those different pieces. And then from a cybersecurity perspective itself, sort of internally how we do things, we're having to look at data lake technology, because we're now receiving so much data. and it's only going to increase with those devices, that we need a new way of managing it and analysing it. And then that's also bringing in the artificial intelligence piece, which, although there's plenty of things claiming to be artificial intelligence, at the moment it's more machine learning, but no, we're only a few years away from having some of these things. So it's a real big evolution at the moment going through.
Yeah, and as you know, the common theme is it is just ever evolving, so it's not going to stop. And so moving on to the last part, then, you mentioned that you've hired grads before, and so obviously this is probably something quite prevalent. What's the one or two bits of advice you could give our listeners, people who are coming to the end of their courses now and thinking about entering the job market, as someone who's hired many grads over your time? What's one or two pieces of advice you could give?
I think being proactive is great. I had somebody on LinkedIn just last night at the university reached out looking to try and secure industrial placements and things like that. So that to me is a real positive thing, that when people are being so proactive as that, rather than just relying on the university. But I think a lot of it is about demonstrating that you have a passion for cybersecurity and getting that over. And you don't have to be an expert in cybersecurity to do that. Now, you can talk about how cybersecurity affects you with your iPhone or your iPad or your Windows PC. Now, you can use those types of examples to get over that passion. And like I say, also demonstrate those key skills like the logical thinking, the data analysis and that, because those are really relevant to every part of cybersecurity. And look at the different entry paths that there are now. Obviously, if you're already a graduate or about to graduate, that sets a certain level. There's lots of graduate programs. But if you're pre-university, there's lots of apprenticeship programs. Some that take you through to university, some that don't. And there's lots of companies doing that now. I ran a survey on LinkedIn a couple of months ago because I was curious as to how big an impact coronavirus had on that piece. And I was pleasantly surprised that I think about 30% of the companies that responded all had at least 10 or had 10 places open this year for apprentices for cybersecurity.
Fantastic.
So I was quite made me feel positive about things, even in the current climate.
Yeah. And that's absolutely great, because in summarizing, I couldn't agree with you more. For our listeners, think about being proactive. So the outreach on LinkedIn, the outreach on various social medias, making sure you follow and comment and share and to show a passion is also about being visible, isn't it? So show a common interest above and beyond simply looking at your devices. And logical thinking, I think that the thing that you can't get away from, especially within cyber, in my opinion, is you do need to have a certain element of born logical thinking. There is a level of intelligence you have to have within it, because it is a complicated and quite in-depth industry. But if you've got that logical thinking, as we said, you don't need to have the tech degree or not necessarily the science degree, but you do need to be able to transfer that skill, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the different entry paths, because again, you're not the first person on one of my podcasts that has said that although this is aimed at STEM graduates, actually education should start at school level. It should probably even start at junior school level, about what technology, what different roles there are, and what people can do to follow passions, and not make it something you only find out about when you're having to choose your degree.
Absolutely. We've started to get that outreach about cybersecurity, as in being safe online and things in schools.
Yeah.
But we perhaps need to build on that to also talk about all the opportunities in that industry as well.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you. Would you believe that's our time nearly up for another episode, and that has been really, really interesting. And as I said, from the beginning part of your journey, where although it wasn't as direct as different actual places of work, having a flow of different experience, building up different experiences, going through your career, looking at the evolution of cyber, and now that advice, that's just been really, really useful. So I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yes, absolutely. And I hope it's useful for people to set themselves up on a path into cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will be. So to all our listeners, that's another episode of our Future Tech podcast series. The podcast is on our homepage, arrowspodcast.com, as well as on the career portals of our 16, soon to be 17 partner universities. And the audio podcast is on Spotify, Apple, and Google. So please have a look for us on LinkedIn, have a look in your university for the podcast series. And this is another episode. So thank you all and speak to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Future Tech with Charlie Sell, a podcast from Arrows Group Global. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss an episode. Arrows Group is a global technology recruitment and workforce solutions provider who focus on people at the heart of all our interactions. With in-depth technology expertise and global candidate communities, we offer bespoke solutions to every client and candidate. To find out more, visit arrowsgroup.com.